Welcome to Connected. I'm your host, Haley Trimboli. Whether you are PhD curious, navigating your program, or wondering what your fellow graduates are up to, this podcast is your go-to for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and meaningful connections within the PhD community. Today on Connected, we are joined by Ashley Ruba, a developmental psychologist turned UX researcher, coach, entrepreneur, and writer. And after building an award-winning academic program on emotional perception, Ashley made the bold move to step away from academia and build a career on her own terms. Now, as the founder of After Academia, she helps other PhDs reimagine their careers and lives. Ashley's story offers a powerful look at what's possible when you step off the expected path and into your own purpose. So, Ashley, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. Where does this episode find you today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I am currently in Seattle, if that's where that finds me. And then otherwise, I actually just signed a job offer yesterday. So we can talk about that more too. So I'm like very excited about that.
Perfect. Yes, I definitely want to dive into that. But before we get there, I'd love to start just like at the very beginning of your academic journey. Curious to understand what your relationship was or is with academia or school before you began your PhD program.
Well, I always loved school. So my parents actually didn't go to college. So I'm a first generation college student, and back in back in the day when I was much younger, there was a paper ceiling, so to speak, in terms of there were a lot of careers that weren't available to you if you didn't have a college degree. And so my parents were kind of like iced out of a lot of those. So they viewed having a college degree would be the key to a better life. So it was never a question about whether I would go to college. That was just kind of a given. But I remember watching home videos of me, even at 3 years old, reading books. And so I always just really loved to read and read anything I could get my hands on. I really like school was really easy for me. I really liked learning. And that kind of just carried through, elementary, middle, high school. I feel like I changed my mind quite a bit about, what do you want to be when you grow up? Originally wanted to be an astronaut. Sally Ride was my idol. I feel like she inspired a lot of young girls to go into science. And then in high school, I had a close friend of mine who died by suicide. And that really kind of like spurred my interest in psychology specifically, because I just wanted to understand, why did this happen? Like, how could I potentially stop this from happening with other people and like help kids like him? And so that's why I initially wanted to pursue a career in psychology. And so one thing led to another, and then I got my PhD in developmental psych, but that was everything that led up to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so was it a moment? So you got into your undergrad program
Mhm.
at, I think, Duke, I believe,
Yep.
studying
Mhm.
psychology. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so I came in interested in psychology and English specifically. There's definitely like an alternate timeline where I have a PhD in English or American literature or something, but in this time it's psychology. I think like like over half of people when they enter Duke, they want to be pre-med. So I was like, I'll do pre-med, I'll be a psychiatrist. I didn't really understand, the difference between psychiatry and getting a PhD in clinical psychology. And I actually ended up doing pretty poorly in some of my pre-med requirements. So calculus was the first course that I just really didn't do well in. And so I started reconsidering like, am I even interested in doing pre-med requirements? I ended up going into a seminar about different kind of career paths in psychology, like graduate school wise. And then that's when I realized that I could do a PhD in clinical psych, be a therapist, and PhD programs are paid for mostly instead of going to med school and having to take out a bunch of loans. I'm like, well, why would I go to med school to do this thing? So then I wanted to do a PhD in clinical psych, knew that it was going to be really competitive and that I would need to have research experience. And I ended up as a sophomore volunteering in the lab of my developmental psychology professor. I took her developmental psych class and thought it was just like super fascinating. And so my first research experience was in an infant language development lab at Duke with Makiba Wilborn. And that really kind of changed my entire outlook on research. And I got so into research in that lab and still think babies are so interesting. And by the end of my undergrad, I kind of realized like I don't think I really want to be a therapist. I think I want to pursue research with like in infant emotion perception specifically, because that's what my honors thesis was in. So it was like a very, very kind of like winding path, but I was like very much on the research train by the time I finished undergrad.
Yeah, and that seemed like it maybe carried into your decision to pursue the PhD, like, all of that was very connected.
Yeah, I think I have a memory of being like elementary school and asking my mom about graduate degrees in terms of I was like, how long can I stay in school forever? And she was like, well, you could get a PhD, which would be, 4 years of undergrad and then another like 4+ years of grad school. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fine. Like it didn't deter me. I was like, I just want like in my child brain, like the best degree. I just wanted to be in school forever because I loved learning so much. So it was never, I don't think like a question in my mind about like whether I would go to graduate school. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. So,
Yeah, yeah, so interesting. I really love hearing too, like, when as a first generation college graduate too, like, navigating that path, I think is so fascinating when maybe you don't have others, like, who have gone before you, but you're still, like, wanting to head there.
yeah, and I'm the oldest of two. So I was very much like carving in this path and then especially like going to Duke as a first generation college student was like it was really hard. I think they have a lot more supports there now for first gen college students, but when I was going there, it just felt like I was surrounded by all of these like really rich private school kids who were like way smarter than me. And I remember even like doing a tour there before I applied and listening to the tour guide talk about like all of the things that she had done over her summer. And I just remember thinking, there's no way I'm even going to get accepted into the school. Like it's just not going to happen. So it was like really intense imposter syndrome. But then like once I found psychology and found also like creative writing at Duke and these things that I was actually like very interested in and very good at, then I feel like that sense of I don't belong here started going away. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely hard for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like getting locked into research was probably a big, like, opening for you too, because I think, like, the PhD is really centered around research and writing,
Mhm.
but to, like, be exposed to that and then be excited about it, like, to carry you into, like, wanting to keep pursuing that.
Oh, for sure. Makiba, my undergrad advisor, like she's also a first gen college student and also Black. And so it was just, she describes her lab as kind of like the UN. It was just very diverse. I didn't feel the probably maybe like the only place at Duke I felt like I actually belonged. And she was a really big part in kind of like encouraging me to pursue a PhD. And then ultimately, when I ended up working as a lab manager in her lab as a gap year between undergrad and applying to my PhD program. And then when I got my acceptances, I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go. And one of them was at the University of Washington, which was I grew up in North Carolina, so it's all the way on the other side of the country. And I was 22 and feeling very like, I don't know what I want to do. And she was like, I think you like actually want to go there. I think you're just like kind of scared, but it seems like you really want to go. And I was like, yeah, it's the best program that I've gotten into. And I loved
Mm.
Seattle when I visited. And so she was definitely like in my corner being like, you should just do it,
Mhm, mhm.
which was ultimately like one of the best decisions that I've made was to move out here for my PhD.
Amazing. So what
Yeah.
made you originally choose, like, to even submit the application to University of Washington? Was it their program itself or advice from a advisor?
It was my graduate advisor, Betty Repicoli. So, like, when I was applying to graduate programs, I was a bit atypical and then I had very specific research interests. So, I really wanted to study infant emotion perception specifically. So, how babies learn about other people's emotions. How does a human learn what a smile means and what a frown means, for example? How does like a 14-month-old know when you're happy? And we just really didn't know that much about and I still don't think we know that much about like how this ability develops. And so I was looking at all the programs all over the country to figure out who was actually studying this topic. Essentially no one, like very few people. So I only applied to 7 graduate programs and it was only with people who either were studying that specifically or who were studying something like close enough, like maybe face perception in infancy, to where I thought maybe they would be open to me like doing a related line of research in their lab. So Betty at the University of Washington, her research of anyone who I applied to was the most in line with what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So what advice, like looking back, maybe would you give people who are evaluating, especially maybe as other first gen college students
Mhm.
who have gotten to this point, like when they're evaluating and choosing a PhD program, like maybe questions that you might encourage students to be exploring or other factors?
Yeah. At this day and age, I would think about like what career do you ultimately want long term? It's not something that I gave a lot of thought to. I had kind of perhaps like erroneously at the time assumed that getting a PhD would be I could just like get whatever career interests me. I didn't think that there would be any kind of barrier to that. But also at the time, I was encouraged by faculty in undergrad, and then when I got to grad school, like everyone in my department to pursue a faculty career as a professor at an R1. So I didn't really consider any other career path until you know kind of midway through my postdoc when I decided to quit and pop over into industry.
Hmm.
So if I were 22 now and I was applying, I would think about like what career do you ultimately want with the understanding that you will probably not be a faculty member mathematically, and also just given the state of higher ed, it's not going to improve. So it's extremely competitive, not to discourage anyone from trying, but just to go into this like understanding the odds are not in your favor. And so, with that in mind, with the programs, thinking about which program is going to set you up for the career that you ultimately want, perhaps considering do you need a PhD to get into the career that you ultimately want? If not, and you're still like, I'm okay studying this topic for 5 years, even if I don't end up studying this for the rest of my life, like totally fine. At that point, I'd also consider where might you want to live for 5 years? Like Seattle, again, like I visited here and I remember the first time I saw the skyline and I was just blown away and like very much in love with the city. But cost of living is really high here. And the graduate stipend at the time when I started was like it's like 2 grand a month. Like my rent right now is 2 grand a month. So I think like it's increased a bit, but just understanding if you were to come here, you'd probably have to be living with roommates. I ended up picking up a couple of other like part-time gigs in the department to increase my income. So, but if I were to live in like a lower cost of living area at Duke, for instance, like the stipend was very good for the cost of living there. So it's also something to consider. I wouldn't go into debt for a PhD. That's just my opinion. I don't think that's worth it. So,
Hmm.
and then otherwise, I think when you go on interviews, just watch out for red flags for your advisor. Your advisor is basically going to make or break your graduate school experience. Feel like any hesitation or like any red flags if you talk to like current students or former students of theirs and you just get the sense that this person's going to be really difficult to work with, you're probably not going to be the exception. I've met a lot of people who knew and they're like, I'll be the exception. They were not the exception. They had a
Hmm.
miserable grad school
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
So, you can try, but I don't it's gonna be really hard. So those
Hmm.
are, I guess, to sum up, money, location, do you need the PhD for your career, and
Hmm.
your advisor are like 4 of the big things that I
Yeah,
would look
so
into.
practical. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think those are really good and trusting your intuition probably on the faculty one. Just curious to dig in just slightly on like understanding your career. Do you have any suggestions or tips of where PhD or those who are interested in a PhD who know that they maybe don't want to go the academic path, like where can they explore job opportunities or where would you recommend maybe they explore like career paths outside of academia for a PhD or where somebody could start like better understanding that if they were thinking about this route?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. There's a lot of us on LinkedIn who
Yeah.
have PhDs who have moved into a variety of different career paths. I mean, Google has a lot of information, honestly.
Yeah.
Even I mean, if anyone uses AI, like I use like deep research prompts and ChatGPT, like obviously all AI hallucinates to some extent, but it's a really good search engine. So, I mean, you could even tell it like these are kind of the general things that I'm interested in. What might you suggest for career? And just I mean, that's just a place to start potentially. There are companies that do hire a lot of PhDs, and there are some roles that require a PhD. It's not that many, but there are some research roles that will require a PhD. But again, it's like, it's really hard. I feel like in your early 20s to know what you want out of anything in life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think what I've learned over the past few years is that clarity often comes after you take action as opposed to before. So you could do all of the career exploration in the world and think like, I would really like this career, and you're not going to have any idea until you're actually doing it whether you like it
Yeah.
or not. So, you can test drive like careers in a way where you could volunteer, you can do an internship, just or talk to people. That gives you more information about whether you might like a particular career path. And there's like plenty that you could learn in like books, or I feel like every single career has a subreddit where you could even just like look and see what people are talking about to be like, am I interested in joining this conversation, or does this feel really boring to me?
Hmm.
So that can also be a good way to like take the temperature of a career path. Also, with the understanding that AI is like really disrupting a lot of hiring right now. And so it's worth considering. We obviously don't know how any of that's going to play out. It will obviously be, I imagine, in a very different spot in 5 years. So keeping that in mind when thinking about your career and long term plans, I think will be really important too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lack of options of finding things. It's maybe more of a intention or focus setting on doing that.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed from chatting with people is that if like academics tend to place a big emphasis on knowledge that's like published, like in a book or a journal, or it's being taught by somebody who has a credential, but there's plenty of, I guess, like less behind a paywall knowledge that exists on the internet that's still just as valuable, if not more valuable. So it's just a matter of talking to people and figuring out what you need to know about a career path.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably like the least thing that people remember they can do, like just talk to people, right?
Yeah, I didn't used to spend much time on Reddit, but I have more recently, and there's so many like really interesting conversations. Like I'm in UX research, so I've just been like looking at the UX research subreddit, and it's just really interesting to see like what people are talking about and what problems people are facing. And even in, I've been in like the ADHD and autism subreddits, and that is just a treasure trove of information with people sharing things that have worked for them in terms of energy management and just like managing life and things that you wouldn't find in a scientific article probably.
Yeah. I love that. I love that source of information that folks can be navigating and going towards because it's there. And so you get into a PhD program. I'd love to hear a little bit about, what the first year specifically of that program was like for you. I mean, whether that was the transition from like one state to another or if
Hmm.
it was like workload, balancing life, etc.
Man, that's so this is 2014. So I'm like thinking thinking back then. Yeah, moving was um wasn't that hard. I think like adjusting was to a brand new city where I didn't know anyone was hard. I think in particular there were two people in my lab who actually ended up leaving by the end of my first year, but neither of them, I don't think, liked me that much. And so there was like some interpersonal conflict there that my advisor wasn't aware of in the beginning, but then she realized what was going on and she kind of like stepped in on my behalf. But I think that was the only time where I thought about like quitting the program, mostly just because I had moved across the country and then I was just having these like weird interactions with people in my lab, and it felt really bad. And then what else happened? I wouldn't say like the workload was particularly hard that first year. I did a first year project, but that wasn't something that I came up with on my own. It was something that was a project that was already ongoing in my advisor's lab. So I finished that. That was the year that I took the most classes. There were very few classes that I had to take for my program, but had to take first year stats. And then, yeah, I would say it was just kind of like making friends was the hardest part. After I moved out to Seattle, my college boyfriend broke up with me, which was at the time I was very sad for like having moved. And then within a month, I had met someone who I ended up dating for 8 years. And so
Mm,
who I'm still like really good friends with. And I made a lot of friends through him. So it kind of took a while to adjust like to Seattle. But yeah, the workload was fine, but that's just me. I feel like my first year, I definitely came in thinking like I'm really good at like what I do. I had won
yeah.
awards for my research, and I feel like by my third year, I was feeling like I don't know anything about
Mm,
anything at all. I can't believe I had like any confidence in my abilities when I first started my PhD program. So I feel like that was kind of maybe expected, but also hard to be going from feeling confident to feeling like an imposter. And I think that's just is that the Dunning-Kruger effect, I believe.
yeah. And so maybe year 3 too, like at this point, you're probably like thick or deep in kind of like a dissertation of sorts. So I'd be curious to hear like, well, one, you told us you were very clear on like what you wanted to study getting into the program, and that's what led you to choose this um university. And so like how did you navigate that? Kind of like
Mhm.
the dissertation-ish topic here and,
Yeah.
like, landing on what you ended up studying, some of the highs and lows of.
Yeah. So our program was intended to be completed in 5 years. So there were actually like very clear milestones every year. So there's a first year project. At the end of the second year, you submitted a master's. End of the third year, you did your general exams. And the fourth year, you proposed your dissertation. And then fifth year, you defended. So that was really nice to have that structure. So when I started my second year, I for the dissertation option at UW, there is a 3-paper option. So essentially, you have 3 papers that are either published or have been submitted for publication, and you like staple them together and write an intro and a discussion, and then that's your dissertation. So I knew that I wanted to do that option. So starting in my second year, I started creating and running what would ultimately be 2 of the 3 papers for my dissertation. And then I was writing my master's thesis was a write-up of my first year project. I would say that that was a little challenging, mostly because it was my advisor's study, and so I at the time, like, I didn't have a lot of personal interest in it, and I found it really difficult to focus, which now I understand was, like, undiagnosed and unmanaged ADHD, and, like, that was, like, my difficulty in focusing. I didn't get that diagnosis until a year and a half ago, and I think that overall, I struggled with, like, chronic fatigue a lot during my PhD program to the point where I was, like, going to doctors and doing sleep studies and trying to figure out, like, what was going on, and they're like, "You're probably just depressed." It's, like, the
Mm,
answer that I got. So that was really hard to experience that for my entire PhD program, and looking back, I realized it was just me like trying to focus and like forcing myself to focus and just exhausting myself without any kind of like help that a stimulant could have provided. So I wish I would have known that. I think that definitely made things like added a layer of difficulty. But yeah, but the dissertation, I studied babies. And so that if anyone listening studies babies, they're really difficult research subjects. And I tested about over 1,000 of them over 5 years, which is a lot of babies. I ended up hiring undergrad RAs to help me because at that point, after my second year, I was the only person in my lab. So we didn't have a lab manager. There were no other graduate students at any point. So I was essentially the lab manager and the graduate student. So I ended up again hiring people to help me because I'm like, there's no way I can run, all these studies and like recruit participants and do all of this on my own. And then, yeah, and then on top of that, I think half of the quarters, I was also a teaching assistant in addition to working as a writing tutor in the psychology writing center. So I just kind of have a lot going on. I guess that's how I work best is if I have a lot to do. Yeah.
yeah, and so speaking of, like, doing a lot, you also taught yoga at a cat cafe
I
while
did. I
completing your
did.
dissertation, which I love.
Uh,
Yeah, I'd love to hear, like, with all of the hats that you were wearing, what role did, like, hobbies, movement, play, etcetera, like, have in keeping you grounded?
Yeah, I actually had, like, really firm work-life boundaries. So, I after, like, 6 p.m., I didn't work, and then I didn't work on the weekends, and I knew other people who did, but I think for me, that's, like, always how I had managed my energy, even as an undergrad, that was how I had kept my work schedule, which I realize now it was actually like really good for me from a neurodivergent perspective is just being able to get like a lot of work done during the week and then completely disconnecting from work so I could recharge and do it all again. So that's what ended up working really well for me. I would exercise I realized was really important to dealing with the fatigue that I was feeling. And also, if anyone's lived in Seattle, winter can be really hard. It's like pretty dark. And so I think, especially the first few winters I was here, I really struggled with like seasonal affective disorder. So I knew that exercise and sleep were going to need to be a really big priority. So I made that a priority. And then with the yoga, one of my good friends at the time, she had done her yoga teacher training and was teaching yoga and I don't know, it just kind of seemed like it was something that I wanted to do. I got into doing hot yoga when I moved to Seattle, and it really helped with my mental health, especially in the winter, just being able to go into a warm room. So I don't know, I wanted to teach. So I ended up doing a 200-hour yoga teacher training in the third year of my PhD program, which was a choice. And then for the 2 years after that, I taught at a cat cafe on Saturdays, until I got too busy with my dissertation, and I was like, I really would like my weekends back so I can recover and focus on that. But otherwise, yeah, I did a lot of camping, went out I really got into techno in Seattle, so I'd go out, like, to and dance to techno, like, on the weekends and yoga. Yeah, just now I'm just, like, listing all the, like, Seattle things, like, stereotypical Seattle things to do. Seattle's beautiful, it's very outdoorsy, so there's a
Yeah.
lot that to discover here.
Yeah. Now people are just gonna be, like, checking out, like, jobs up there and, like, how to
I mean,
anyway,
if you like working in tech, it's there's a lot of tech jobs.
it's a lot of options, yeah. So, I think you would get a lot of people who would say, like, "My gosh, like, how did you close the computer at 6, and how did you not work on weekends?" Like, I couldn't even imagine. Like, what would you say to that, or, like, what helped you?
I think what helped is my partner at the time who just didn't work on the weekends, and I think I also for as much as I did make academia, like, and attach it to my self-worth and, like, part of my identity, I also realized that I just didn't wanna spend my 20s working all the time because I just didn't, and there were lots of other things that I wanted to do, and I also just acknowledged that there was always going to be more work to do. There's always gonna be, like, more papers I could be writing, and I was making what I thought was, like, good progress, and then I also I know something I learned, I guess, like, a year ago when I did work on the weekends because I was, like, running my own business and I had a full-time job, experienced the worst burnout that I've ever experienced in my entire life. I had never experienced burnout before, and I realized then, like, it was because I had worked on the weekends and because I just, like, didn't give myself any kind of break to recover, and so I think that that's part of what leads to burnout is just not giving yourself enough time to rest. And so for me, like completely disconnecting the weekends, I knew that I was going to be more productive during the week and get more done than if I worked 7 days a week. So it's more of a I don't remember what the principle is, but there's some principle where like if you give yourself a week to do a project, like you'll take a week to do it. But if you give yourself a day, like you're only going to take a day. So you just have to learn how to work more efficiently. And so by just saying, I'm not going to work on the weekends, you force yourself to learn how to work faster with the time that you do have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really helpful for others to hear this because I think the other narrative is what gets talked about a lot is like working all night, working weekends, like that's what this is. And so I think it's important to say like you are a well accomplished academic who did amazing work and managed that.
Yeah, and that's definitely I mean, I remember the first couple, like, scientific papers that I read in undergrad and would just sit there and, like, read them for like a paper an hour or more for a single paper and just be like, this is taking so long, but you just do it more and then you learn. Like I read so fast now because it's just like practice, and you learn how to skim and you learn how to not just like read everything word for word. You learn how to just get like the most important information out of something that you're reading. You end up learning how to write quicker. Yeah, it was just really sad. I remember we had a housewarming party and two people from my cohort came, and it was a Sunday, and they were like, yeah, don't tell anyone, but we take Sundays off and we don't work. And I'm just standing there like, oh, are we supposed to, is that not a thing that we're allowed to do? It was just so weird because I'm like, I've never worked like any weekend. I will say that like when I was writing my dissertation, I did end up working on the weekends because I had to, but prior to that, I didn't. So
Mhm.
yeah, I really don't like the overwork culture in academia or capitalism in general, especially because you're not getting paid. You're not getting paid enough. If you were getting paid like a lot more money, sure, but you're just like all of the work that you're doing extra is just unpaid labor for the universities, and I just really don't like that.
Yeah, lock that in.
Yeah.
Listeners, maybe. um, and I'd love to switch to like the topic of mentorship and hear, what did mentorship look like for you during grad school? Shaped how you think about like support and independence in a PhD program. I think this is a pretty important topic that folks are like learning to grapple with in their programs.
Yeah. My advisor is great. She's still great. She's also, I didn't know at the time, found it later, also a first-gen college student, which I think made a really big difference. And yeah, she was really supportive, even when she was, I felt like I would give her my writing and she would just like destroy it. And then later be like, you're a really good writer. And I'm just looking at all these comments being like, am I? But no, she was really great. She was really supportive. I never had like any conflict with her ever. I can't say the same for other people who are my cohort, or other labs that I saw. And I think it was seeing other people's advisors and how they were treating their mentees, where it's like, oh wow, I like really lucked out here because I knew there was one advisor in my department who they stopped allowing him to have graduate students because like, he was just such a bad advisor. And then there was
Mm,
someone else who I don't know if I think maybe she graduated one person and then everyone else was kind of like forced out of her lab. She just had like she was basically like, why would you have the weekends off? She expected you to work on the weekends. And so, like I said, I think seeing those other examples of really poor mentorship was, I don't know, like pretty eye-opening. I think I'm someone who I prefer people who are like a little bit more hands off, and like because I'm someone who like if I need help with someone, I will, if I need help with something, I will ask. Um, but being micromanaged or being like having some expectation that I'm working a certain number of hours just doesn't really work for me because my energy level is kind of like all over the place. So there's some days where I'll work 8 hours and I'll get like a week's worth of work done in an 8 hour period because that's just kind of how my brain works. And I don't want to be like, kind of like locked to like you have to be working a certain amount of hours. So having like support and trust, and also just, um, I don't know. I would say that like in my postdoc, I experienced more like really bad mentoring. And
mm,
so that was also eye opening to see like that's how it could look like as well. I think why my undergrad advisor and my grad advisor were so good was they really didn't have any like ego attached to their work in academia. So they were very much like about the students and about teaching and about mentoring. And it wasn't like, it didn't feel as like cutthroat and competitive. They're just kind of like, I'm going to publish my papers. I'm going to do really good work. I don't care about being super famous. And I think that attitude is like really rare in academia. And I got really
mm,
lucky by having both of them in
mhm.
very formative periods of my training.
Yeah, that's so nice. Good things to be looking out for as folks are navigating that. I'd be curious to hear as you got to the end of your program, like some things that might have been top of mind for you, like what that experience was like as you were wrapping up PhD life.
Yeah. So like during my PhD program, I was trying to publish my papers, like I was getting rejections, and some of the rejections I got, like the comments were just like they're really brutal. And that really when I ended up being a reviewer later in my career, I remembered that. And like when I'm writing something, like imagine that there's a second year graduate student on the other end of this comment and like don't be a jerk. Because those comments were, I would just read them and I'd be like, I should just like quit my program. Like I'm so
Mhm.
stupid. Like I don't know anything about this field.
Mm.
And of course I don't because I'm a second year PhD student. So I ended grad school and you know, I think I published like one paper from grad school and it was like right at the end of my 5th year. And so I was just going through the whole thing being like, I don't know if I'm actually good enough to get a faculty position at an R1. I ended up sitting on a hiring committee during my 4th year. We were hiring someone for the developmental area. And so I saw the process from the other side. And after that, I was like, there is no way that I'm getting a faculty job because, everyone who was getting shortlisted had multiple publications and grants, and people were getting cut who had CVs that were so much better than mine. And for reasons that I like didn't always agree with, that seemed sometimes like a bit arbitrary and political. I think that really like shook me, and I was like, why am I going to pursue this career where it doesn't even seem like I have a fair shot at it?
Mhm.
So I did consider late 4th year, early 5th year of grad school, going into industry. I talked to people who were working in UX and tech because I was in Seattle, and 2018, 2019, that was kind of the thing that you did if you had a psych PhD, and it was like pretty easy. I actually had at the time like Google and Microsoft were both contacting me on LinkedIn, being like, "Hey, do you want to contract with us?" Which would never happen now, like ever. But I was like, I don't know that I want to work in tech. I just didn't really know the people who I talked to who were working there. It's kind of like that was their backup option, so they had, like, failed to get an academic job,
Mm.
and so that was, like, the tension that I was feeling. I also wanted to stay in Seattle, and I knew that if I were to pursue an academic career, I wouldn't be able to. I'd have to leave, and then long story short, I ended up applying for one postdoctoral fellowship, which was an NIH T32. It was very competitive, and they only had one spot, and I ended up getting it, and then I ended up moving to Wisconsin,
Mm.
for this fellowship at the end of 2019.
Mhm.
So, and I mean, we could talk about like why I ended up taking that and all of that, but that is what I ended up doing. But if I hadn't gotten that, then I would have moved into industry and I would have probably moved into tech and stayed in Seattle.
Mhm, mhm. So, yeah, so you then go into a postdoc after
Mm-hmm.
your graduation, but it sounds like you were already kind of, like, thinking about various options at this point, and, I know that you ultimately did decide to leave,
Mm-hmm.
like, spoiler alert, so
Yeah.
curious, what ultimately led to that shift or that, yeah, path for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like part of the reason I was considering leaving in grad school is I just didn't think I was good enough to get a faculty position. And then when I got this fellowship, I was told that I had one of the best applications in the 30-year history of this program. And they were like, "You'll definitely get a job at a top 20 R1." And so hearing that was and like getting this fellowship was very much like, "Oh, I'm not a failure."
Mhm.
And then the year following that, I got multiple dissertation awards, one from the University of Washington, like the dissertation award for all of the social sciences, and also from the American Psychological Association. So then getting those back to back, I was like, oh, maybe I don't suck. But what really changed was COVID. COVID changed everything, right? And so I moved to Wisconsin end of 2019. I had 6 months there. I was piloting my very first study in early March 2020. And then I was like, well, now we're shutting down the university and we'll be back in 2 weeks. And then two
Mm.
weeks was 2 months. And then it was 2 years. And, alternate timeline, COVID didn't happen. I'm probably a faculty member right now. But I think with COVID, the great resignation, this phenomena where you had millions of people, mostly Americans, all quitting their jobs end of 2021, early 2022, which is when I decided to leave my postdoc. I think COVID really just made a lot of people realize that life was really short, and that sacrificing everything for a career. I moved across the country to a place I'd never visited, and I didn't know anybody there for my career. And then all of a sudden, I was in lockdown, thinking like, did I make an enormous mistake by doing this? And yeah, so those were like the immediate reasons. And then at the end of 21, I applied for one faculty position that I was like a really good fit for. I actually had someone on the hiring committee encourage me to apply. And then I didn't get an interview. And um, that really like shook something in me. I was really upset. I was like, what do you mean you're not going to interview me? Like, have you seen my CV? Like, what more could you possibly want from me?
Yeah.
And so it was that coupled with just like really not wanting to be in my department anymore for just like a variety of like interpersonal reasons. I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm completely done with this. I'm done with like not being valued here. I'm just gonna do something else. And so then I decided to quit.
And you found your way into UX research, and you had
I
already kind of
did.
mentioned like
Yeah.
folks were reaching out to you, curious to hear what that transition was like. And then also like for folks who are thinking about this trajectory, transferable skills that maybe PhDs recognize in themselves if they face a similar.
Yeah, so I will say that if anyone's been keeping up with UX, it's changed a lot over the past few years. And so I got my first UX job. It was a true entry level position in 22, and I ended up taking that because it was the first job offer I had. And that is how badly I like didn't want to be a postdoc anymore. I was actually interviewing and had a lot more traction for research scientist positions, behavioral scientist positions than UX, which I understand why now because I just didn't really know what UX is and I didn't have any experience. But with this entry level role, that didn't matter. And then, 3 months into that, it was starting to feel like, okay, this is an entry level role. I've kind of like grown out of this. And at that point, I really wanted to move back to Seattle. So I was thinking, where could I work in Seattle? And I ended up applying to a contract position at Meta, which I got, and then moved back to Seattle so I could take this contract. And that was, I think, 6 weeks before the first round of layoffs. So that was like a very weird time to be to be at Meta and to be at UX. And I think like after those layoffs is when the field really started changing and it got a lot more competitive just because you were competing with people who had years of tech experience. And I would say the field is like it's very much like that now. So perhaps in the past where you didn't actually need to have UX experience to enter the field, like you do in the very same way that, you know, 10 probably like 20 years ago, you could get a faculty job with like no publications, one publication. And that's just what happens with like really competitive fields. They get more competitive. So it's the same with UX. In terms of transferable skills, if you have a background in human subjects research and social science research, that's kind of like the basis for UX, but the application of these research skills is incredibly different. So you're sacrificing some amount of rigor in order to do things more quickly, and it is tied to a business impact. There's a lot more that you can read on the internet, like lots of think pieces about like where the field of UX is. I think part of why it's in the spot that it's in is a lot of companies were hiring people out of academia who had no business experience. And then they weren't actually able to, I'd say, like fulfill to really do like good UX because they were doing it with an academic lens and not with a business lens. And I think that's part of the problem that we ended up in with UX specifically.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think just good insight for folks who are thinking about just that business acumen is so important. That is
Hmm.
probably not really taught in academia. It's
Oh, no, not at all.
maybe some schools, but probably not the most.
I mean, yeah, I think that's part of the issue is you're at these like quote unquote nonprofit institutions where you're taught to accept like low wages. All of the deliverables that you have, it's like a publication, but it's not tied to any kind of profit or like revenue generation for the university. And you're not even thought to view your teaching or your service or any of that as a revenue generating activity for the university. If anything, you're taught that like if you move into industry, you're selling out. So it's a very like anti-money, anti-profit lens that I think a lot of especially like social sciences and humanities PhDs are reared in. And you have to undo all of that conditioning in order to really succeed outside of academia.
Yeah. I feel like I could dive into that specific
But yeah.
subject with you very deep, but I am curious. Can you tell us about after academia? Because I feel like it maybe ties into here to some degree. Like, what inspired it?
Yeah.
What are the biggest mindset shifts that you're helping PhDs make, like your mission, etc.
Yeah, started accidentally, actually. So it was, when I decided to quit my postdoc, I don't know, I didn't wanna, I guess, go quietly, like, to say. So I ended up making a tweet thread about, like, "I'm leaving academia, here's why," and that went viral on Twitter. I think it was, like, saying a lot of things that other people were feeling, and also it was very surprising that I, of all people, would just quit because I had no reason to quit. I was, like, very successful, and I just didn't wanna do it anymore. And so after that, I had, like, so many people just messaging me and asking me for help. I'm like, "I can try." Like, I guess I kind of figured it out, but I don't really know what I'm doing, and that just continued. So I met with, probably over 100 people for free until I ended up moving to LinkedIn, and my account there hit, I think, 20,000 followers in a month. And so at that point, like, the demand and people, just like the amount of people asking me for help became completely, I could meet people all day, every day, and never do anything else. So at that point, I'm like, I think I've come across a problem
Yeah.
that could have a solution, which is, this is what the core of UX research is, like, what problems do people have and how can we develop a product or service that actually helps people? And so I was like, could I actually do that? Could I actually, get paid for my time and my expertise? And so that's when I started the business, and I named it after academia because I think when I was a postdoc and a PhD student, I couldn't imagine what my life would be like after I left. And I think that's what was, like, really scary and kind of stopped me from leaving a lot, is it just seemed like, who would I be? What would I do? Like, I don't there's no structure. Like, I'm off of this very structured career path, and it's, like, super scary. And so that was the genesis of the name for it. So yeah, so I've had, I think, like, over 300, like, people who I've, like, paying clients who I've helped now. And then, other people on social media who have gotten value out of the things that I posted. I would say I just gave a talk last week on this topic of, like, mindset shifts. So it should be, like, on YouTube at some point. But I would say that the big thing that people don't understand is, like, how much grief is involved, especially with, like, identity loss. And I think, I can give you resume advice all day long, but until you're kind of, like, grieving the loss of this career path and the loss of structure and the loss of, I thought my life would be this way and now it's not this way, and now I have to, you know, write this other chapter that I didn't think I would write. I think not not accepting that this change is happening, I think it really, creates a lot of difficulty for people. And I think, like, the stress of it all makes it really hard to do this career change. It's not like another kind of career change, especially now in the political climate that we're in. I feel like there's a lot of very valid feelings, like anger, that people are dealing with when they're
Yeah. Thanks for shining the light on
yeah.
that, like, probably often overlooked aspect of the transition and maybe unable for folks being unable to identify that. Like, two tips that you might have for folks who, like, how do you navigate it, or
Yeah.
suggestions you might have?
Um, I would remember that you're not your job. So and I should, like, write that and, like, put that on my computer or something. So I think the more that you can detach yourself from the thing that pays you, the better you'll be. You know, hang out with people you love, like, do things that you love for fun, and develop an identity and shift your sense of purpose and meaning outside of this job and shift it to something else that's more stable. The more that you can even shift it to yourself, the better, because that's probably the only stable thing that you really have in the world. So that's my big tip. And then the second one is something that I've grappled with a lot, is just letting go of this idea of it's kind of like letting go of your ego, but really letting go of these notions of prestige and autonomy. I think when I've talked to people about leaving academia and the people who they really don't want to, they say, "I could never have a boss." Or like, I'm overqualified for that job. I wouldn't want it. And so I think if you really interrogate, like, why are you saying these things? Like, why do you feel that way? You'll realize that there's a lot of jobs that you can have out there where they may not be like, prestigious or as high status as working as a faculty member. And maybe you don't have like as much autonomy. Maybe we can debate about like how much autonomy you have in academia. But I think that people create a lot of like unnecessary suffering for themselves by, again, just like really clinging on to this idea that like I'm the expert and like I know best. And so I should have a career that reflects that. And the more that you can let go of that, the more that I think you'll just realize that there's so many jobs out there that are, they're good enough, they pay well, and they allow you to once again like get your sense of meaning and your sense of self-worth from something that's not your job
Mhm,
because you're not your job. And
mhm,
your job could disappear tomorrow. And the more that you
mhm,
can like again really
right,
have a sense of like stability that's not tied to this very volatile thing, the better off you'll be in the
mm,
long run.
mhm, yeah, that's huge, and, like a weird shift here, but speaking of jobs, you started off saying you got a job
I
offer,
did.
not to like make an awkward transition, but if you're willing to share what you're doing next. I guess my frame here is just kind of understanding what's top of mind for you, what are you excited about? And I'm sure this is probably
Yeah, man. So I just signed a job offer for full time at Meta. So I'm contracting there right now, and in May, so a few months ago, I wasn't sure when I started this contract if I wanted to pursue full time. It wasn't my intention when I initially started, and then when I was working there, I realized that I really like working. I work in reality labs, so the Oculus, the AR VR division. I was like, I really like working there. The work's really interesting. It's like really intellectually engaging. It's challenging. My colleagues are really great. Everyone's really smart. And so I just, I asked my manager about full time and she passed me to a recruiter and I went through the most grueling interview process I've ever been through in my life, and somehow passed. And yeah, and then I just got matched to a team. So I'm going to be doing hardware UXR, working on wearables in reality labs. So yeah, I didn't think I would come back to Meta. I didn't think I would. July is historically like the worst month for hiring in general. So there's a lot of things that just really surprised me about this. But I don't know, it's really I know like big tech gets a bad rap. I don't think it's all I think like with all things there's like good things and bad things about it. Same with academia. And for me, this was just it was like clearly the best choice for where I'm at in my career right now. I'm just like really excited to be like I don't kind of like building the future, I guess. I don't know. It's really cool.
Mhm.
There's like I don't know. I really like working in tech, which is if you told me as a grad student that I would be working at Meta, I would have been like, you're out of your mind. Like no way. No way would I ever work there. No way would I like working there. So again, going to show that, clarity follows action. And so I never thought I would like working here until I was here. And I really like working here. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know we're at time. I've just
yeah.
really appreciated this conversation. I do have two final questions.
Yeah.
The first one that I ask each guest is what's one book, podcast, or article that you think every PhD student or hopeful student should read or listen to?
Wow. Oh my gosh. I can tell you the ones that immediately came to mind. I guess if you're looking for an honest take about academia and like faculty positions, the professors in Karen Kelsky has a book that's kind of like demystifying the academic job market. I think that's a very eye-opening look about what's required to get a faculty job. But then otherwise, there's a book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace that I really like if you're trying to figure out how to like set boundaries at work. I'm just gonna list off two more because I can't pick between them. There's
That's hard.
the Good Enough Job is a book about not entangling your life with work, and I think it's very much aimed at high achievers and telling stories about people who really made work their life, and then you know how that worked out for them and what they've learned from it. And then the last one would be Transitions, which is by William Bridges, which is about life transitions and
Mm,
the this like messy middle part that a lot of people find themselves in. And that was really helpful for me in thinking about like my transition from academia to industry and the like emotional like middle part that everyone like goes through. So any of those four I think would be
yeah.
really good. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I feel like it covers the spectrum of
Yeah.
like you're diving into academia, you're moving out. So
Yep.
and the boundaries and peace. So great,
Yeah.
great. Final question. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice before starting your PhD, what would it be?
Yeah. I guess yeah, maybe just like not don't get, like, too attached to the future because you don't have I don't know, like, when you're in your early 20s, you have no idea what you're gonna want in your 30s, and that's or 40s, and that's fine and normal, and I would hope that you would change a lot in your 20s, so I'd say, like, don't cling too tightly to anything in the future, like, don't get too attached to it, because that's gonna if that doesn't happen, then that's gonna, create a lot of suffering, so instead, just try to like, be present and enjoy the time that you have, enjoy your friends and your family. Yeah, that because you like I said, you don't have any idea what the future holds, but you have now.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that was a thread throughout this conversation too. So I just appreciate you coming back to it. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You're very easy to talk to. And I feel
thank you.
like you have just a great perspective on this journey and a very interesting journey yourself. So I just really appreciate your time and sharing your story. For any listeners that want to like follow your work or learn more, connect with you, like where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I mean, my website is ashleyruba.com, otherwise, I'm, like, mostly on LinkedIn, so I also have, like, X and Instagram, not as active on those, but yeah, I'm one of, like, the only Ashley Rubas, so you can also just Google me and I'll come up, so
That's convenient. Cool. Well, I will certainly link to that in the show notes. So, huge thank you again.
yeah, thank you for having me.
This was such a great conversation with Ashley, and I feel like she had so many great things to share from what to look for in the programs that you're applying for and things that she considered before that's the next step in her journey, as well as how to navigate the program. I mean, to end work at 6 and not do the weekends when possible, I feel like that is a huge unlock for PhD students. And really just hearing about how she's transitioned out of academia and positioned herself and the work that she's doing now. So, very interesting. Definitely connect with her, follow her. Links are in the show notes. I'd love to hear what resonated with you the most. So, drop me a message or a comment. Thank you so much for tuning in to Connected today. You can find all the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your PhD community. And be sure to follow along on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for more conversations just like this. I hope to see you next time, and let's stay connected.